Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Arts and Environmental Justice Symposium hosted by the Mural Arts Institute at Mural Arts Philadelphia. I'm so excited for today's conversation today. Water is Life, Reflections from an Environmental and Cultural Emergency. Before I welcome our guests to the stage, and introduce today's moderator, I wanted to do an access statement and share that I'm a brown woman with brown eyes, short brown hair, in a black dress with flowers on it, sitting in front of a gray wall with art on it. I also want to acknowledge on behalf of Mural Arts Philadelphia that the land on which we live and labor were stolen from the Lenni Lenape peoples and their descendants who survived and remained in the homeland, in addition to those in the diaspora, who were forcefully removed as far as Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Canada, and are still marginalized even in the city of brotherly love. Registration to the symposium was free, but please find links to the tribal governments and Indigenous organizations on Lenape land, Philadelphia, in the chat, and consider donating and learning more in the spirit of reciprocity and reparations. And I'd love now to welcome Benny Starr, the One Water artist in residence at the U.S. Water Alliance, to the screen. And I'll just do a brief introduction of him. Black music and Southern culture intersect with deep roots in hip hop, gospel, jazz, blues, and rock. They're woven with rich history, resiliency, and storytelling that elicits a quest for a higher calling in those who connect with them. The same rings true in the music created by South Carolina Lowcountry artist Benny Starr. The most recent solo project, a water album, recorded live with his fellow bandmates, the 420s, at Charleston Music Hall, was released on Juneteenth, 2019. Following the release of a water album, Benny Starr has been featured in the Oxford American's yearly Southern Music issue, made history by becoming the first hip-hop artist to perform at Spoleto Festival USA, as well as a water album being named South Carolina's Best Album in 2019 by the Free Times. In 2020, Native Son, a duo comprised of Benny Starr and harmonious singer-songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist Roderick Cliche, was formed. Together, they are redefining what it means to be dynamic while remaining highly respected. Native Son's most recent release, The Land, is a rallying cry that echoes the injustices of Black legacy farmers at the hands of the USDA and part of an ongoing partnership with the Acres of Ancestry Initiative, Black Agrarian Fund, and the Black Farmers Appeal, Cancel Pigford Debt campaign. As a part of the ongoing collaboration, Native Son screened Restoration, a concert film, on Juneteenth, 2020. In the fall, Restoration was also released for a limited time viewing to coincide with the Justice for Black Farmers Act of 2020, introduced by U.S. Senator Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, and Kirsten Gillibrand on November 30th. To date, Restoration has been selected to screen at the Pan-African Film Festival, Seattle Black Film Festival, Rhode Island Black Film Festival, Las Vegas Black Film Festival, the Nice International Film Festival, and more. The U.S. Water Alliance welcomed Benny Starr as their inaugural One Water artist in residence in October of last year, and through this one-year residency with the Alliance, Benny will work with staff and the Alliance network to infuse arts and cultural strategies into thinking, problem-solving, and programming. On March 23rd, 2021, Benny Starr was one of Grist's 50 Fixers of 2021. And this list includes emerging leaders in climate, sustainability, and equity who are creating change across the nation. We are so honored to have you here today with us, Benny. Thank you for taking the mic.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and I will begin with an access statement of my own. I am a Black man with short hair. We call this a fade. I have a fade sitting in front of my living room wall, which is white and teal, with a bookshelf and my sofa, honey-colored sofa behind me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm thankful for Mural Arts Institute for having this conversation. Water is Life, with other artists and cultural workers that I deeply respect the work that they've been doing and continue to do. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give an abbreviated introduction for both of them, because for me, from coming from the hip hop world, I like for everybody to have a part in this cipher. So we'll get them to actually speak to you all about who they are and what they do. First, I'm grateful to be joined today by Emma Robbins. Emma Robbins is a Diné artist, activist, and community organizer who serves as the executive director of the Navajo Water Project, part of the human rights nonprofit DigDeep Water. I'm also grateful to be joined from Flint, Michigan by Joe Schipani, executive director of the Flint Public Art Project, who also serves as the city historic district commissioner and vice president of the Martis Food Pantry. And lastly, I'm also grateful to be joined from Boston, Massachusetts by Erin Genia, multidisciplinary artist, educator, and community organizer who currently serves as an artist in residence with the city of Boston, working with the Department of Emergency Affairs. And now I'm going to hand it over to Emma.
Thank you, Benny. Thank you for that introduction. I'll start with an access statement of my own. I am a brown woman who is wearing a top that has flowers on it with a blue background. I have turquoise earrings on, dark hair, and am sitting in front of my living room wall, which is white, and on a brown couch. I want to acknowledge that I am on Tongva land. I am here in Los Angeles, and I'd like to honor those who have come before us, those are here, and then future generations of the Tongva. As was said, I myself am Diné. I will introduce myself in Navajo as per custom. So, She'e Emma Robbins Yaneshia, Biligana Neshle, Hashkan Hadzoche Bashischin, Biligana Dashiche Aldo Nakaidre Lashanale, Tonanis Dizide Nasha, Do Navajo Water Project, Do the Chapter House, Binashnish Do Binat Anishle. So I introduced myself by my clans, and I am an artist, an activist, and as was mentioned, the executive director of the Navajo Water Project. I'll talk briefly about what we do, but I know it'll come up in conversation later. We are a group of Diné people. We're about 20, and we work on our own reservation to help people get access to clean, safe drinking water. The Navajo Nation has some of the highest rates of water poverty and some of the highest rates of water contamination, primarily from arsenic and uranium, which has made many people on our reservation sick. And so we work to make sure that people are getting safe water in their homes, and so that they don't have to haul water from unsafe sources. A large part of what we do is also educating people both on and off the reservation about safe water and their rights. We're a part of the human rights organization DigDeep Water, who does work throughout the United States. We work exclusively in the US, have done work previously in other countries, but we realized that the need for work here in the United States is very big. I do art, which is related to my professional job or my professional side, which obviously is water, but I work specifically with educating people about treaties. And I work with a lot of different materials that are sort of seen as pan-Indigenous or humorous, because I think when educating people about these really tough issues, it comes down to if we don't laugh, we'll cry. And so it's really important to approach it from that angle for me. And then lastly, which is a combination of my arts and community organization with the Navajo Water Project, I am the founder of the Chapter House, and we are an Indigenous arts organization. And currently everything we do is online, but we will have a brick and mortar space here in Los Angeles on Tongva land and back home on the Navajo Nation. So again, I'm so grateful to be here and really looking forward to these conversations with all of these fierce individuals. Ahiahet.
Thank you so much, Emma, for that introduction. And now I would like to hand it over to Joe Schipani.
Hi there, I'm Joe Schipani. I'm the Executive Director of Flint Public Art Project here in Flint, Michigan. I will give my statement. And so I am a white man with glasses on, bald hair, a blue and white striped shirt, green. I'm in my office with a green wall in the background with a lot of art on it. So like I said, I am the director of Flint Public Art Project, and our mission is to activate vacant spaces here in the city of Flint with art and try to help the city reimagine what things can be. As you know, in 2014, Flint had a water crisis where the state switched our water resources to the Flint River and did not properly treat the water correctly, corroding the pipes, having lead flow into a lot of the houses. Since then, we've done a lot of work around water activism. We've done with art, and recently, as they've been fixing the lead lines, we've been doing work about changing the narrative. The water crisis in Flint has overshadowed so many things great things that people are doing in their neighborhoods that no one noticing them, and they're feeling like their story is being written for them as always this crisis victim, and people are wanting to move forward. So we started a mural project that will help bring attention to the people and highlight the projects that people are doing in the city. So, and we'll probably get in a lot more different conversations about the water crisis and the art and all that when we get into the other. So I will turn it back over to Benny.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Joe. And at this time, I'll hand it over to Erin for her introduction.
Hello, it's an honor to be with you today. I do have a short presentation that I'd like to share with you, so I'm going to share my screen. First, I want to say thank you very much to the Mural Arts team for inviting me to share my work with you today, and to thank you to Emma Robbins and to Joe Schipani for speaking about your important work, and to Benny Starr for moderating this conversation. Erin Genia Imakiapi, my name is Erin Genia. I am Dakota. I'm a member of the Sisseton-Wahpetin Oyate of the Lake Traverse Reservation in South Dakota. My pronouns are she, her. And I currently reside on the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people and within the territories of the Nipmuc and Wampanoag tribes. My accessibility statement is, I am a Native American woman with light skin, dark hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a white and black polka dot shirt and sitting in front of a red curtain. I'm excited to do this short presentation for you about the work I've been doing as an artist in residence for the city of Boston. With that work, I've been working with the Office of Emergency Management and the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. And I want to start off by talking about a particular piece of work called Earthling. Earthling is a performative character. It's an alter ego in a sense. And I started doing this work to express this Dakota concept of mitakuye oyasi, which is it is expressed here in this quote by Vine Deloria Jr. I did this because in my organizing work, I was coming up sort of against a paradigmatic dissonance about how to approach the natural world. So I created it as a reminder that underneath our closely held ideas and our systems that capitalize upon us and colonize us and our adopted ideologies, that we're actually earth-based beings, and we're not just of the earth, that we are the earth. So I created this to raise some questions about that, and to consider how our human understanding has come so far away from this reality that we're not separate, from the earth, and how would our responsibilities change if we understood that reality of life that in this quote here talks about the universe as a comprehensive matrix of life forms. So within the work that I've been doing for the city, I created a project called Cultural Emergency Response, which you can go and visit on the boston.gov website, and I'll share that in the chat as well. So I began my residency last year, and I was it was a very tough year for all of us, and I was realizing that with each passing day, the evidence that we were in a state of cultural emergency was mounting, and that people from many walks of life are demanding change. And we're witnessing this across so many different areas, how unchecked cultural emergencies are intensifying and generating deeply intertwined disasters at every level of society. And that increases people's susceptibility to hazards and limits our collective resiliency. And I think that water is something that affects us all, and it is a way to talk about this cultural emergency that we're all in. However, even though we recognize what's going on, we're acting, we want change, our society remains resistant to altering our trajectory. And I guess I'm just wondering how long can we or should we continue to go on accepting the harms that our culture produces? And so I created this framework called Cultural Emergency Response, based on my work in seeing the Office of Emergency Management sort of spring into action last year during this public health emergency. And I found it very interesting that emergency management procedures work behind the scenes. They gather funding sources and resources, people power to rapidly fix these sort of dire issues. And they focus mostly on things like flooding and hurricanes and fires, chemical spills, terrorist attacks. But I think that this sort of effort is actually needed to address major societal emergencies like climate change, economic inequality, institutional racism, health disparities, ecological devastation, and Indigenous peoples' dispossession. Instead of superficial fixes, we really need to be looking at the root cultural causes of these issues, and that those stem from sort of these faulty cultural foundations of our society, which I'll get into a little bit. So I guess one example of this would be looking at climate change. It's really rooted in the dominant culture's philosophy that views the earth and its systems primarily as resources to extract and profit from. And unfortunately, in our society, there's few truly effective ways to evaluate, transform, or stop ourselves outside of mass protest movements, violent or nonviolent revolution, war, or societal collapse. Without correcting course, the harmful byproducts of our culture accumulate in urgency and in scale, and they create emergencies across many different areas of peoples, of places, events. So I think what needs to happen with this work, I've been exploring and doing research and creating artwork about this, that we have to build cultural transformations and recalibrations into our political, economic, and social systems. So in order to really think about this, we have to look at culture. What is culture? And the way that I've been defining it for the purposes of this project is the collective practices that are embedded in the daily rituals of our life. Culture is really at the heart of how our society functions, and it's those ideologies and philosophies that drive culture that determine how our economic and political and social systems are established and how they continue to operate. I think that these doctrines, these social doctrines that fuel societal progress, also create harm and create disasters on a huge scale for people. But the thing that's different about this cultural emergency response is that it recognizes that culture actually begins with personal decisions, expands to your family, and then to your community, to your city, to your region, to the nation, and to systemically, even internationally. And so part of the work of this is to really look at that and to own our own thinking and actions at every level of that. And I realized this because I've been a community organizer for many years and I faced a lot of burnout. I was finding that in my work with social movements, that coming together in community to hold systems and institutions accountable, in some ways, our groups were kind of automatically or subconsciously continuing to uphold cultural philosophies that contribute to and cause those very same injustices and inequality that we're fighting against. So it really got me to thinking, what are some of those harmful ways, those things that create emergencies? And I narrowed down a list, but it's not a comprehensive list. There's probably a lot more that I'm not thinking of, but the top ones for me are a toxic individuality and our separation of self from the natural world and others, hierarchical and binary thinking and authoritarianism, misogyny and toxic masculinity, short-term thinking, idealizing greed and consumerism, violence as a tool, coercion through brute force and fear of dispossession, Western cultural supremacy and assimilation, historical amnesia, competition over cooperation, wastefulness and the squandering of energy, resources, and labor, cultural appropriation, and undervaluing youth, elders, and the extended family. I feel like that these norms really came from the imperial philosophies of Western European colonialism and stemmed from the Roman Empire. There's no way that we can separate ourselves from the fact that this country is a settler colonial state that gained its economic wealth and political power from genocide, war, slavery, land theft. And as an artist, I see this cultural supremacy in my field a lot, but I really feel like this cultural supremacy is something that is holding us back. It's preventing us from engaging in a process of critique that can really strengthen our society and our communities. So lastly, I wanted to share this work with you and just thinking about this concept of cultural responsibility, which coming from a Dakota perspective, our responsibilities to our world around us are of paramount concern. And, we have to think about the ways that our actions are impacting the world. And yet the things, those ways of thinking that I was just talking about have become so normalized and they create situations like the ones I mentioned before. They create water crises, they create mass extinctions, they create extreme political polarization, genocide, and they create refugee crises, slavery. I mean, there's just so many things when thinking about water, thinking about technologies that are divorced from natural world-based wisdom. So, thinking about this and considering how that in order to survive, people do have to orient themselves to these systems, to these ways of thinking. But I think that it is possible for us to acknowledge the dynamic of that and also to be critical about how we orient ourselves to those systems. So as we hold our institutions accountable, we have to also hold our communities accountable and hold ourselves accountable and understand our role and our, our responsibility to this state of cultural emergency. One last thought is that we actually don't have to reinvent the wheel at all, that through the ways of emergency management, we can actually look to those movements, leaders, scholars, and artists, community workers, and agencies and organizations that are already doing this work. And we can streamline those processes and provide support networks within this sort of construct of a cultural emergency. So thank you, Wopida Tanka. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Erin. I'm really excited to have this conversation now. So we're going to invite Erin, Joe, and Emma back so that we can get into this conversation. And I know very personally my entry point into water, my origin story, being from the Lowcountry of South Carolina, where it sort of is the entry point for a lot of Black people in the United States because of the enslaved people that came through the port of Charleston, and where I grew up in a small town in the Lowcountry where two man-made lakes converged. We grew up right there where they met, and a lot of the land, a lot of people that I know actively who are still in that small town were displaced with the creation of those man-made lakes. And also being a kid, my mom being a social worker, one of her jobs was to man shelters during hurricane season when we were children. So the people who couldn't afford to go away when we had hurricane season from June to November, we would often be there with her, me and my sister. So coming back to Charleston and seeing the type of flooding, seeing who was more susceptible to the flooding, who was impacted greatly by that flooding, that was my entry story into water, and even creating a water album in my work now as artist in residence with U.S. Waterline. So I want to pose that question to Erin, Emma, and Joe. What is your origin? What is your journey? What brought you to the topic of water? And we can start with Emma.
Thanks for sharing your story. It's always really interesting, like this question and hearing how people got into it. I think you can't be a human, you can't be an animal, you can't be a living being without having some sort of connection to water. But I always think you definitely can't be Indigenous and not have a connection to water. Obviously, it's an issue that many Native nations face, and it's a fight that many Native nations face. I have a connection to water being from a desert, and the scarcity of it has always played a big part in my life and who I am. But more specifically, getting back to this idea, or rather the fact that the Navajo Nation has so much contamination of uranium and abandoned uranium mines. I got into the work that I do specifically because my grandmother got stomach cancer when I was about 14, and that was a direct cause of uranium in the groundwater and in the soil and in the air. And I remember at 14 thinking, this is a total injustice, right? Like, just because of where you live doesn't mean that you should be exposed to these types of things, and you shouldn't get sick and you shouldn't die, because very unfortunately, my story isn't unique on the Navajo Nation. Many of us have relatives or loved ones or community members that we've lost to uranium. And so I realized then, I was very fortunate to have running water and electricity in my home. I'm from Tuba City, which is the largest community on the Navajo Nation. But my family that lived about 30 miles away or even 15 miles away didn't have those luxuries because there wasn't any infrastructure, because of the fact that there was so much contamination. And so it was something that, growing up in a house that had a tap that could just turn on, and then going to stay with my grandparents on the weekend and seeing that they didn't have that, including not having sanitation or an indoor toilet, which is something that we all need as well. I knew that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And I think, all of us having backgrounds in the visual arts or the performing arts, we all know that it's up to us to also spread that word and let people know that this is an important issue. I think all of us working in the US know that when we talk to people, oftentimes they'll say, oh, well, that only exists in Africa. I'm doing quotation marks here. It's something that's really maddening, because it's like, well, which of the tens of nations are you talking about in Africa? And there are water issues in the United States, and people need to realize that, because yes, we are a quote unquote developed country, but there are over 2 million Americans that don't have running water in their homes. And it's something that I always wanted to tell that story visually and draw people in. And make it a lot more accessible rather than, oh, these are the EPA levels, because not all of us understand that. So definitely a combination there of my entry point.
Thank you for sharing that, Emma. And Erin, can you speak to what your origin story, what brought you into water?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I guess I would just say that sacred site that I can think of, Dakota State Grist associated with water. Even the state of Minnesota, which is Dakota homelands, even though our reservation is in South Dakota, the name Minnesota comes from Dakota word, the Dakota phrase Minishota Makoche, which means where the waters reflect the clouds. And that's our homeland. And so, that phrase carried through into the name of the state. Everything is connected to water. Water is life. And it's considered to be a life form. It's considered to have a life of its own and a consciousness of its own. And through Dakota philosophy, everything is interconnected and everything is related. And one of the ways that we're related is through water. And yet, our there's right next to it, there's a CAFO, which is a concentrated animal feeding operation. And the pollution from that CAFO is leading to the groundwater and poison the source of water for the people. And so there's just so many ways that water is significant, and more attention needs to be paid to it, which is why I talk about it in my work, and why I want to bring attention to these issues.
Thank you, Erin. And Joe, with your work in Flint,
Well,
please,
yes.
I'm interested to hear.
Well, I live in Flint, so that it's growing up in Michigan. We're surrounded by we have tons of fresh water that is access to drinking. So you would never think of a city in Michigan having problems with water, which there are many. I mean, these old infrastructures are dying, and they're being exposed, and the water crisis hit, and in Flint, and I've lived here through it, and just all the damage it's caused, the trust damages. I mean, there's so much that has really changed the way people in Flint think also, and how they trust and how they move forward. I mean, yes, this would have probably happened in Flint eventually due to the old infrastructure, but the fact that it was man-made by our government to save money, and nobody cares. They still don't care. One person was charged that the charges actually stuck. One person lost their job, the token person they fired, so it's like no one cares. And we're living in a time where you're only in the spotlight. Your crisis might not go away, but you're only in the spotlight till the next crisis somewhere else happens. And here in the United States, it just seems like since 2014 water crisis, the United States has had crisis after crisis after crisis of all different things. And so it's like, it's taken 7 years and we're still not fully fixed. We probably have another year or two left to finally fix the water pipes in Flint. And even after that, how are you going to trust them? I turn on my water and it smells like chlorine. I mean, you gotta take a bath and it smells like an indoor swimming pool. You know, it's like, I'm supposed to drink that? I don't think so. Even after it's been fixed and then, you know, here and it's been replaced. So it's, you know, it's a struggle. We've done some work around it. And lately we've been doing some work around helping the people find joy in where they're at and highlighting the work that they're doing. Because, I mean, you can only suffer so long. And we need to I'm not wanting to say move on, but we need to find joy in where we live while we're here. So that's a lot of what we've been doing with the mural project and the work that we're doing with Flint Public Art Project.
Thank you so much, Joe. And that brings me to, it makes me think about hearing and doing research on the work you all do, whether it's failed infrastructure for communities, whether it is access to hot and cold water, dealing with contamination, or the realities faced by Indigenous people on occupied land here in America. The thing that sometimes I've experienced as an artist is art being relegated to simply beautification. It's just purely beautification. It's kind of narrowed to that. And seeing the work that we're all doing in very different ways, I believe there is a more robust, more full function of art and artists as well. So I would like to ask you all to speak to the ways that you see art functioning in your work that may be outside of the mainstream perspective or the mainstream purpose of art. And any one of you, feel free to chime in to answer that.
Are you gonna go, Erin?
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah, you can go. Go ahead.
okay. With me, it's also not just about telling a story. It's not just about beautification, but it's access. So we live in a very poor, Flint is a very poor community. Majority of people live below the poverty line. It is mostly African American. We do have some great institutions. We have like Flint Institute of Art. We have some galleries, but people don't always want to go to it. And poor people or people of color, because of how they can be treated, you're in those places. So when you go to a gallery and you're a 19-year-old kid wearing a hoodie with the backpack and you're followed around because of the color of your skin, are you going to want to go back and learn more about that art? So having an outdoor gallery and making that access for people to have art from people all over the world is very important, I think, because then you can go around and you can look and you can see different art. You can figure out what you like. One of the things is people are afraid to go to galleries when they don't know anything about the art. That if they go with their friends, they don't want to look stupid. When someone says, well, this piece by Van Gogh is da-da-da, and they're like, you know, at least now that they've experienced art on their own, able to look at it, enjoy it, figure out different styles, they can have some kind of sense of what they like. And I really believe that when you're doing especially public art and with murals, that it needs to reflect the demographic that it's in. So if I'm going to put people on a mural, I don't want to put a bunch of white people. I want it to represent the population. So people can look at a mural and say, that looks like me. And that, you know, that looks like me on that one, or that look, you know, so everybody gets to see what they look at. So curating these things is difficult, you know, it can be difficult at times because I want to make sure the community gets what they want, not what I want to give them. Because in the end, after the mural's up, after things are done, I get to walk away. I live in Flint, but I don't live in your neighborhood, and I don't look at it every day. So I'm going to make someone happy and try to give them a better life and give them some beautification. Then I need to give them what they want and what they want to see. So that's probably my 2 cents.
Erin, you were going to go. How do you see that art, a full function of art in your work show up?
Thank you for this question. I love this question because I think that um, it's at the heart of so much of the work that I do and work that I see happening, like really great artwork that I see happening. It's like really questioning this. And from my perspective, I see art coming from a Western perspective as I can actually see it as harmful to Native American culture because in some ways, because historically it has been used as a tool of assimilation to attempt to strip Dakota people of our culture and our definitions of art, which go back thousands of years, completely independent of Western art. And so for me, that work is it's like my life's work is trying to understand that legacy and to hone what I see as the creative spirit and the creative force, which is the creative force is part of the universe itself, and we embody that. And artists can tap into that to bring things into the world that are beautiful but useful as well, that can pose questions, that can serve practical uses, that can help people get through things. And so those are just some of the things that I think about with regard to that. Thank you.
Thank you for answering that. What Joe said, even about galleries and practical uses, that it just resonates with me because oftentimes galleries seem very inaccessible to me. Coming from hip hop, where certain traditions get carried on and passed through different genres of music, whether it's soul or gospel, that end up into jazz and hip hop, the ciphering circles and vocal traditions and things like that. So I resonate with what both of you said, and I'm very interested, Emma, as well, to hear your perspective on this after a lot of the research that I've done on work that you continue to do.
Yeah, no, I think it's a perfect entry point here is, my background is in the commercial art world. So I directed two different galleries over several years in Chicago. And I went to the School of the Art Institute, which is, a museum is part of it. And I totally agree with what everybody says. Those are spaces that are not accessible. Working in a white cube space, we would have people come into the gallery and they'd kind of like creep in and, they say like, oh, am I allowed in here? Or how much is it to get in? And it's like, well, this is free. Everyone's welcome here. But it doesn't always feel that way. I think also, especially as a woman of color working in that sphere as a director, oftentimes, going to art fairs, it's like you're spoken to differently, even as an employee, than my white boss might be spoken to. And it's something that's really disappointing, having gone to the School of the Art Institute, and the Art Institute is like $23, at least when I left Chicago, it was like $23 to get in. Who can afford $23 to get into a museum? If you're a family of 5, that's like crazy money right there. And it's not fair. And, yes, I know that there's like one Thursday afternoon every month that's free. I don't know people who aren't working until 5 p.m. and can take their entire family there. It's just totally unacceptable. And it's something that definitely needs to be changed. And, I left the commercial art world more than 5 years ago to come work at DigDeep. And it's something where I totally agree, like we need to make these spaces more accessible, but we also need to make this work for the community, by the community. I think it's definitely about education, and oftentimes, again, visual points of entry or performing arts, Benny, in your case, music, whatever it is, those are ways to draw people in. And as Joe said, it's not just about beautification, it's about being able to tell a story. A lot of my artwork is only understood by people who are actually from the reservation and by people who are Navajo or people who are Indigenous. I mentioned working with materials that are pan-Indigenous, but also what I do is working with materials that are very specific to my own reservation and to the Diné people or the Navajo people. And, I had this show a couple years ago in a gallery in Chicago, and people would come in and they were non-Navajo or non-Native or residents of the res, and they would say, well, I don't understand this piece. And it's like, well, this isn't always for you to understand. And I don't mind having that barrier where it's like only my Native sisters or brothers will understand this, because I'm not going to make work that's only for white cube space, and that's only for collectors, and that's only for people who don't understand things. And I think specific examples I can give are, working on the reservation during non-COVID times. I live there half the month, and it's something where I'll collect materials like pamphlets from the Navajo Nation EPA that's educating people about water contamination, or forms that are for people to fill out to eventually get on a list to get running water. And it's something where if you're from the Navajo Nation, you'll understand those in 2 seconds. If you're not, you don't know what that is. And I think it's important, again, to have work by Native artists for people who are Native. And I think on the flip side, it's also about having those conversations that open up non-Natives or non-Indigenous peoples, opening their eyes, where it's like, I didn't know about this. I didn't know that 30% of Navajos living on the reservation don't have access to clean water. And from there, it's like, not just in one concentrated area. I can guarantee that everybody on this Zoom call, or, all the panelists we all know, like, probably within miles of your own community, there are people who don't have access to running water. And I really hope that that type of art will encourage people to go and Google those communities and find out how they can get involved, and not otherize or exotify people, but actually to have a sustainable way. When Erin was listing all of the really great examples, of toxicity, and I want the full list later, Erin, but all of these different things, like stepping away from that and actually finding a way to be sustainable and collaborative, and not just consentful and pushing on solutions to different communities. But again, I think we really have to address issues of accessibility, and also understand that art isn't going to solve everything, but it is going to make a huge dent in these issues.
And I love that you said art isn't going to solve everything, but it will make an impact. And I'm going to circle back to that. I've heard so much from you all already about the ways in which you work, the ways it centers water, and the different ways that you've seen lack of access, failed infrastructure, pollution, contamination affect the communities that you're a part of, that we're all a part of. In what ways, because we can't ignore the reality of COVID-19 that we've been facing for the last year plus, in what ways have you seen specifically COVID exacerbate those existing problems, those existing inequities, those existing existing presence of failed infrastructure in your communities? In what way have you seen that in the work that you're doing and with the communities that you're a part of? We can start with Joe.
I can kind of go on that. One of the things with the Flint water crisis, well, during the water crisis, a lot of people misunderstood or didn't understand and whatever, and stopped paying their water bills. So for a long time, they couldn't get the water shut off because of the water crisis. But once they removed that, they had a big bill, and they had to pay these bills, and their water got shut off. And so there's a lot of people that are still living on bottled water, bathing, cooking, using it for the bathroom, everything like that, and not having water. And so when the pandemic hit, and we're saying, wash your hands, clean this, clean more, da da da. How are you going to do that without running water? Because you can't afford to pay a $3,000 water bill. It's a problem. And so this problem is just going to keep going and going, because now that the pandemic hit, we have the same problem. You don't have to pay your water bill because it's not going to be shut off. And these people aren't working. And so they're not able to pay the water bill since they don't have to. It's not going to be shut off. So what's going to happen when they have another $2,000 water bill? In Flint's water bill prices for Michigan, I moved 10 minutes away outside of it. My monthly water rate would be about $50 a month. It's $150 here for two people. So how can people afford that? People can't afford their water. And this pandemic is putting a crisis on top of a crisis with people that are suffering from lead poisoning. So make them more accessible to having problems with COVID-19 and people dying from it. So
Thank you for that, Joe. Anyone else? How have you all seen, Emma or Erin? How have you all seen this COVID-19 crisis exacerbate those existing issues?
Erin, if you're okay, I'll jump in real quick. Great. So, the Navajo Water Project, we technically do long-term water access projects. And what I mean by long-term is we're installing what we call home water systems, which again, brings hot and cold running water into homes. And it's something that is going to last multi-year, or else we're helping people get hooked up to main water lines, because the home water systems are actually for families living off-grid. And those are people who won't get water for decades, or else they'll never get water because they're just living so far away from water lines or electricity. And, overnight, our entire project changed because we were no longer able to go into families' homes and to do these projects. We couldn't survey because we couldn't meet with people. And so we had to switch to doing emergency response projects and mutual aid. And it was something that, we first started out by doing bottled water deliveries. And obviously bottled water is not sustainable. It's not good for the environment. And there are just so many people, again, on the Navajo Nation who don't have access to running water, that we had to prioritize and work with people who were either COVID positive patients or elders, or people who, again, are living very off grid. And so we then transitioned to doing, sorry, one second. Speaking of the res, that's my res dog barking there. Apologies. So we transitioned to doing storage tanks and water delivery. And that was something that took a lot of orchestration, because, the Navajo Nation is huge. If we were a state, we'd be the 10th largest. And so it really was a lot of planning and working with communities that we had never worked with before. I always say that's one of the silver linings of the pandemic, was we went from working in forming communities to working in, 20 plus communities. And it's because we were really forced to come together and say, how are we going to solve this problem? The Navajo Nation had some of the highest death rates in the entire world and infection rates because of COVID. And it was something that our jobs are pretty emotional as it is, like getting people who have never had running water. But it was really hard to have family members and those in our community pass and not have them present anymore, and including elders and keepers of our culture and our language. And, these are libraries of information that we'll never get back. And so, it was something where on a project level, it was really hard. And it was like, oh my God, we have to do this ASAP. The urgency of it is so important. But then also on a personal level, dealing with that every day. And I think myself and my team members, we didn't realize that until it was like a couple months in, where we finally had a little breather. And it was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm going to cry every day, because it's something where you just see these high rates of loss. As Joe mentioned, it's the CDC and the World Health Organization and a billion other organizations were saying, shelter in place and wash your hands. Well, if you don't have running water, you can't wash your hands. But more importantly, you can't shelter in place on the Navajo Nation. We only have 13 grocery stores. And if you have to go to one of these 13 grocery stores, oftentimes we see that water isn't in stock. And if you have to go off reservation, into Arizona, which didn't have a mask mandate, and New Mexico, which had really high rates, or Utah, which also didn't have a mask mandate, you're exposing yourself to so many people. And so it's not like so many issues with water. It's not just, I don't have running water, that's an issue. There's a lot of emotional toll that goes on with there. There's a lot of secondary things that are just as important with exposure. And it was really difficult. And now, we have the highest vaccination rate in the country and we're seeing a decline, but these are problems that have existed forever, and they were highlighted by the pandemic. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, we don't have running water, electricity, or internet connectivity. It's something that Native peoples are pushed to the back burner so often. But, you know, it's definitely disappointing that it took a pandemic for people to realize that this was an issue. But if that's what it takes to make people take action, then that's what it takes.
Thank you so much for that answer, Emma. I agree with you 100%. Erin, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. I think that in speaking about things in sort of a larger sense, or like an overarching sense, that it really showed for my communities that this way of life that we're living is unsustainable, and that our society is fundamentally out of balance with the cycles of the natural world, and we're not where we should be. You know, I look at an example of labor to explain this, that, you know, it was the people who are cultural workers, healthcare providers, teachers, essential workers, mothers, women, the folks who don't get the kind of support within our society that they should get for the key roles that they play to keep us all going and all alive. Those are the folks who shouldered the burden, you know, in so many ways, economically, emotionally, physically. And so I think, you know, that for me, for my communities, everybody is reeling from that. And thinking about things in sort of like this, with this cultural emergency framework, one of the things that I wanted to do as an artist, because I honestly have had a very hard time making art even during this whole thing, and feeling like I can be creative because of my own responsibilities and my own, you know, mourning. I decided to, through this framework of cultural emergency response, have people in the city of Boston nominate somebody who is would be like a cultural emergency first responder and they receive a cultural emergency kit with different wellness items and art items, and made by Native American businesses, things like that. And so through this process, through this nomination process, I got to like learn so much more from different folks across the city who are filling in those gaps that our society does not, you know, is not meeting the needs of people. And they're putting themselves out there every day, and they're putting themselves on the line to help and to make sure that people have what they need, that kids have what they need, that you know, that people have food, and that people have places to be, and that they have the PPE that they need, and housing, and all of these things. So, you know, that's one thing that for me, thinking about how this has impacted these first responders, and wanting to, you know, looking forward, just wanting to really hold up that work. Thank you.
And staying with something that you all brought up in this last question, as an artist, this has been an extremely difficult time too for me. Creating things sometimes just go out of the window. Writer's block, that's the last thing on your mind when you're trying to focus on survival and whether or not you or your family, your community are going to be okay, just dealing with the realities of the last year plus. And it made me think about processes, right? Examining even my creative process, because previously thinking, oh, the way that I can contribute to solving some of these problems as an artist is to make a song. But that was, even now looking at it, such a narrow way of thinking, being able to examine my own creative practice, explore what that practice looks like, and take it into my residency to challenge internal processes and even the way white supremacy shows up in organizational structures and behaviors and things like that. So that was my next question for you all, and to actually look at one of the questions in the chat that also mentions processes. And that question is, could you please talk about the processes and strategies you use to collaborate with the community members or people who are burdened with environmental issues in the communities you work in, to make them leaders of the art work that should go into their communities? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that process.
I can jump in really quickly. I think for me, I mean, you know, having these three things that I'm working on, the Navajo Water Project, my own practice, and then, you know, community art space, it really was at the point where I felt like I wasn't making any work whatsoever during this crisis, because it was like being so focused on the ground work. I think probably where my art came in would be um, really just like speaking with people and talking with people like elders and finding different ways to record their stories. Like the chapter house started this podcast series, which is called Give an Elder a Mic. And we were recording stories from the elders in our communities, because it just was like such a wake up call to realize that we were losing so many elders, as I mentioned, at such a high rate. But I think actually doing things with my hands and working with the community, actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, I mean, I guess the chapter house is a huge arts project that we started during COVID. You know, I guess it kind of takes like speaking about this, but all right, so let me focus on that. The chapter house started having arts events where people could come together. We had arts and crafts nights. We also had different Indigenous artists speaking about their work. We actually curated a show all about water, which is called But When You Come From Water, that you can view online. And I think figuring out a way to work with the community where it wasn't in person necessarily, but making sure that we were working with people where it wasn't just pan-Indigenous, like we were focusing on very specific groups and different tribes, but also bringing us together, and not just Native peoples, but also our allies and accomplices, because I think it was a perfect entryway, again, to say this is such a huge problem. These problems are being highlighted, but they exist. And how can we educate you about other things? So again, I'm like, oh, I didn't make any artwork, but there was a lot of organization when it came to bringing people together. And I think we can all agree that that's one of the best things, is figuring out how to bring people together without actually having to physically leave their homes.
I appreciate that response so much. I've noticed so much of that in artist circles, people who are creators and cultural workers. So I'm definitely, Joe, I'm definitely interested to hear what you have
One
to
of the
say.
things that we did, we added technology to the Pixel Sticks app with our murals to help locate them and give it more of a gallery experience. So when you download the app, you tap on the plaque at the mural site. It'll give you information about the artist. It'll give you their websites and all that kind of stuff. Also information about the business that it's on, and then start activating things. We've got a series of audio small plays going to start next month on 25 of the murals that are the artist, the writer's depiction of the mural after interviewing with the artist that painted it and talking virtually with some community members. They wrote a short 5-minute microplay that somebody is going to act out on audio, mural scavenger hunts, stuff like that people can do social distance, but still get outdoors, still get exercise, still enjoy the land, but enjoy art at the same time.
I can jump in and
Yes. Yeah.
it's thank you both of you, all three of you, for the work that you've all been doing during this time. That and what you said, Emma, thinking about how even though maybe, you know, I agree, I haven't been doing as much with my personal practice because so much of the focus has been on coming together in community, you know, the ways that we can with this virtual space. And through the residency, I've been doing a lot of work around looking at confronting colonial myths in public space, and working with the Boston Art Commission and the New England Foundation for the Arts, looking at how these colonial mythologies in public space they contribute to white supremacy. So last year, with everything happening with the COVID-19 disparities and Black Lives Matter movement happening, the mayor of Boston and of some of the other towns in the area declared racism a public health emergency. And I mean, I think it was about time for that to happen. But thinking about that, you know, there was a lot more focus on hearing from people of color, Native people, Black people in our communities about these issues. And so I organized several virtual panels around this, and Native people from our community, artists, leaders, culture bearers spoke about how seeing the colonial myths in Boston, which is like, you know, a center of colonization for this continent, how that impacts them. And there are several monuments that have been, you know, removed and been topics of discussion, of intense discussion. And then also thinking about, like, I did a lot more writing and working with other Native artists to try to, you know, put our voices out there and to the public to bring perspectives that are often dismissed. And so that has been a big part of my work this year. And I think, yeah, that has been a creative practice too.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Erin. I totally agree with you. I wanted to get to one of the questions, in the chat here. Let's see. Okay. From Dakota, I am a descendant of the Passamaquoddy people, and for my entire life, our reservation has had highly contaminated water that cannot be used to drink, cook, or bathe. The area is tied to an antiquated water system that will not be repaired by the state government due to cost and existing tax structure. The tribe does not have full sovereignty to manage their own natural resources, including water. New wells cannot be built, etc. What advice do you have for a small group of Indigenous people in a rural community and with extremely limited resources and government support?
I'm taking a second just to make sure that I fully understand here. This is a really great question, and Dakota, I'm really glad to hear that it's something that you're thinking about, because I do feel like, you know, again, we are oftentimes as Native peoples pushed to the back burner, and there might be talks of, like, you know, the EPA is coming in to clean these things up, or the US government is injecting funds to make sure that we can get the work done. But it's like, money is great, but unless you have people to actually do the work, or you have access to the ability to even make things happen, or you have the expertise on the ground. Like, unfortunately, we all know it's not like we have thousands of people who are working on our reservations to get the work done. It's not that we're not capable, it's just that's not always there. You know, the way that the Navajo Water Project was founded was, we were a really small team. When I first started working at DigDeep Water, I was the only employee. And as I mentioned, we're now about 20 people. And, you know, the Navajo Nation, I just read today, we're now the largest tribe. We just surpassed the Cherokee. And so it's a little different because, you know, we are a sovereign nation. We do have a lot of treaty rights that are upheld. Many have not, but most of them are. And I think it's really been a successful project because we've been able to work with communities and to sort of surpass the federal government. I felt like it started working with communities, and then we branched out to working with the tribal government, and then working with the local utility company. So I don't think there's like a copy and paste solution there. I think it's a lot of times rounding up people who are the elders or who understand the problems, and saying, you know, okay, we're not just one person now, or we're not just one entity or one nonprofit. It's now we are a bunch of people, and we're going to come together and make sure that these solutions happen. And again, that's obviously easier said than done, because the Navajo Nation, again, is a sovereign nation, and the situation is a little bit different. But I think once you bring a lot of people together, and I always use like cheesy water analogies here, but it's like you could be one drop, like one person, or if you're a ton of water drops coming together, you are a lot more powerful. And I think also storytelling is really important. You know, a lot of what we do at DigDeep or with the Navajo Water Project is gathering stories and making sure that we're publicizing those, not from a way of like poverty porn or exotification, but actually saying, these are stories that are being told by community members, and really opening up other people's eyes and saying, this is urgent. And again, just making sure that you get people behind you, both the communities, but then also those people who might have funds or who might have ties in DC or on your nation's own capital. But again, I think it's not always like a copy and paste solution. I would love to speak further about, you know, potentially helping there. I am on parental leave for the next few months, but at some point I'd love to connect, because I think it's also coming together and saying, this is what has worked for us in specific situations. This hasn't worked. And again, like I would point you in this direction. So I'm going to drop my email there. And again, feel free to reach out. And if you need to speak sooner, I'll be back in like a month and a half. But if you need to speak sooner, I can connect you with someone from our team too.
I love that. I love that. Does anyone else want to chime in to that question before I move to another question that we have? Okay, and I think this question is for Joe. I think the public art you are doing is great for community building, awareness, and bringing community voices. But also, I'm wondering how this work can go a step forward to address root causes of environmental injustices. And plainly, what BIPOC communities need is more resources, higher basic income, etc. How do you envision public art to address these issues and bring resources to communities?
So I'm one of our big things is we're very grassroots, we're very community led. So the work we do is evolved around a lot of different community groups. And when I say a lot of different community groups, it's if I'm going to do work in your neighborhood, I'm working with your neighborhood group, not all these people outside your neighborhood. Because you need to tell me what you want in your neighborhood. We've had a few that have asked for stuff like that. We did a vote campaign where we did stencil drawing with different shadow figures holding a sign that says vote that you can scan with the Pixel Sticks app also, and it will pull up the online registration for voting voting registration in Michigan. Just trying to bring out awareness. We also did a couple different things around Black Lives Matter. That was led by our vice president of our board, Sandra Branch, that we did the Black Lives Matter in the middle of the street. It was a community project. So a lot of things when you are addressing issues of people, the people need to make sure they're working with you and telling you the issues they want you to address, because I don't want to tell you what issues you need to address. And if that makes sense. So I mean, one of the things like what Erin was talking about with Indigenous art and people doing things that say this is what Indigenous art should be, or I don't want that here. I want, if someone's going to do some Indigenous art here on a wall, it's going to be the tribe in this neighborhood, because they need to tell their story. I can't tell your story. Emma can't tell their story. They're different tribes. They need to tell their story. I can't tell it for you. I can help you curate that process, but I can't tell your story. And so when I work with neighborhoods and I work with groups, I want them to tell me what they want. And we do multiple workshops around that. So that's what I spent almost all winter doing. I hope that answers.
Thank you for that response, Joe. I do have one more question that I want to kind of leave us with, if there are any more questions from our audience. The one question that I do want us to think on, I would love to hear each of your perspectives on this. And how do you envision the role of artists and cultural workers in supporting us? What our contributions look like as we continue to go forward, as we continue to heal and hold power to account? How do we continue to transform and create a more just future after the pandemic? What do you see as our role in that process?
I have some thoughts on that. I think that artists are essential workers, first of all. And I think that, I don't know, I think art is the ability to create and to sort of master that creative process and to question and to make something from just, create new processes for things is something that is really valuable and what is really what we need right now. So the cultural emergency response framework that I developed as an artist in residence was, I think, it's a really interesting case because, embedding an artist in an office like Office of Emergency Management, what will happen? What can happen with that? So should we have artists embedded in all of these agencies? It would bring income to artists. It would bring new perspectives. Sometimes those perspectives might be at odds with the way things are done. But, I think that is part of the work as well. And figuring out how we move forward from this time of cultural emergency into a better place. So I think that in a sense of that is labor, that is work to do that kind of, to provide that kind of perspective and to bring that type of creativity to different practices, whether they're cultural practices, whether they're arts, whether it's political or environmental or economic. There's great value there. And so I think that, I think that artists are essential workers, and we need to figure out, our society needs to figure out how to help artists do the work that we need to do.
I'd also like to add on, one of the things about the pandemic is, I don't know, maybe it was just for me, but it's been giving me the ability to maybe be more upfront with people. Maybe that's a nice way to put it, where when you're talking to funders and when you're talking about art and they're saying, well, people think of art as okay, there's that painting there, right? And they're like, well, art's not really essential. And I'm like, okay, well, if art's not essential, can I have someone come in this room right now and remove everything that art has created? Because you'll be standing there pretty much naked. Because an artist drew your clothes, an artist designed your clothes, an artist did your desk, drew your desk, another craftsman artist made the desk, so when you say we don't need artists, it drives me nuts, because it's like we're surrounded in a world that was created by artists. So I think the pandemic and everything that's going on has gave me a lot more courage to notice and stand up for that. And that's my added sense to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with what's been said here. I mean, I love what you said, Erin, that artists are essential workers, because I think we're not able to get through these really horrific times, because they were horrific times, without having some sort of creative outlet, or Joe, creating projects that are for the communities. I also want to touch back on something you said about, with the tribe from the area. I always think that that's so important to say, like, you've met one native, like, you haven't met all of us. We're all from different tribes. But I was just thinking that as you were speaking, the importance of that. But I do think it is important to actually put funding into these projects and make sure that we're creating pathways for things to happen. It's really easy to say, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but unless there are funds there, you can't make it happen. I mean, that's just the reality of things. Like, money make things happen in a capitalist society and here in the United States. But I also think, sort of touching on what Erin said about the processes and the way that we need to change those. I mean, again, we've realized that we can do these things online. We've realized that there are different ways to come together and engage, that it's no longer about, hey, are you going to be at that opening on Saturday? Cool, I'll see you there. Or, oh, you're going to go to art school and you can pay tens of thousands of dollars. Great. It's about really coming together and bringing our expertise and saying, these are different pathways to make something happen. Because the old way just wasn't working, or, the old way exclusively wasn't working. And we've really learned that not only in taking meetings or attending panels like this, there are different ways to learn things online as well and create things digitally. And if you don't have access to the internet, there's also a way to say, okay, so we're going to correspond via mail, or we're going to do it, in a distant way, because I think we also need to remember that not everybody has internet connectivity. So even if that's what the next step is as artists, tackling the way to deal with that. I mean, there was the movement of mail art and whatnot. Those are new ways that we need to go back and recycle. But we've just learned so much during the past year, and it's important to evolve with that and not just stick to the old ways or say, okay, the pandemic's ending, so now we're going to go back to how things were before. We need to make sure that we're evolving and that we're including more people who weren't able to be included before. And also displaying our work in different ways as well.
Everything you all said, I couldn't agree more with it. One of the things personally also that I'm just taking away from all of this as an artist even is the deepening of connection, the importance of connection, and realizing who the most vulnerable people are and why they're that way, and trying to use the artistic process as a way to deepen the work that we're all doing to cure these issues at the root, and what the overarching problem of white supremacy and what that is causing, and how much harm that is causing to so many people. So I definitely want to thank Erin, Emma, and Joe for being panelists today for this Water is Life discussion. I want to thank you for your work. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. And also thank you to Mural Arts Institute for this symposium and just for creating a space where we could have this conversation. Thank you all for tuning in.
Benny, thank you so much. I really want to reiterate those thanks to Erin, Emma, Joe on behalf of the Mural Arts Institute and Mural Arts Philadelphia. I'm sitting and reflecting on everything you've shared today and what I've heard in the previous sessions, and thinking about how thoroughly they connect to tomorrow's closing keynote, The Story of a New Economy, which is really tackling a lot of the radical futurisms that a lot of you have brought up, and the role of arts and culture bearers in that. I want to share with everyone that recordings of all these sessions will be made online. Sessions that have already happened this week are already online, and we'll add today and tomorrow's sessions to that as well. I dropped the link in the chat, and I think tech support will share it again. I want to invite you also to some of the remaining events for today. At 3 p.m., we're actually hosting a film festival of 8 mini documentaries that were made with our partners across the country who are doing work at the intersection of arts and environmental justice for a capacity building initiative that we manage here at Mural Arts. It'll be really special. All the filmmakers and cohort participants will be there to answer any questions you have as well. Later today, we have an Art of Activism event titled Live from East Austin, which is featuring some of our partners. Raisin in the Sun and Mosaic Workshop, sharing a little bit about their incredible labor in East Austin. And again, tomorrow's closing keynote is the story of a new economy at 12:30, followed by a social hour, actually, that we hope you all just bring a beverage of your choice and in a relaxed atmosphere connect with some of the participants of these sessions and speakers as well, and Mural Arts staff. So we thank you all so much. Thank you for the labor of our tech support and communications team as well for managing this event. And have a great day, folks. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.